everyone. Thank you guys for joining us today. I am Donna Bach, the Boone County Public Library's Public Service Director, and I'm thrilled to welcome you all here this evening for this very important discussion, homelessness in Boone County. We're going to talk about what we're seeing and the work that's being done. Now, before we fully jump in, I'd like to take a moment to thank Norse Media, our team of NKU electronic media and broadcast students who are here recording our event this evening to make it available for future viewing after tonight's event. So thank you very much, Norse Media. Now, during this event, we are going to hear from these very impressive speakers that are joining us this evening, and our discussion will be moderated by Melissa Hall-Summer from the Brighton Center. So without further ado, I will turn it over to her and our lovely panelists. Thank you, ladies, so much.
Okay, welcome everyone. Wow, look at what a wonderful crowd. And this is what community care looks like. Humble and engaging, seeking to understand, bringing expertise. I see some familiar faces out there. I see other faces that are not familiar, and I hope we can get to know each other. But as we start down this journey tonight and spending time together, realizing we have a lot of expertise in this things right here. Am I doing that? Okay, just want to make sure. We have a lot of expertise on the stage right here, but there's a lot of expertise of neighbors sitting out in this group. So I will welcome you at the end with questions, comments, etc. We all are seeking to understand solutions. And when we look up here and see our unseen neighbors, sometimes we think about homelessness, there's a lot of stereotypes, right? There's a lot of things that people think or think they know about folks and their journey. And a lot of times you'll hear people say, well, some people just need to get jobs, or they need to stay away from substances. And if it were only that simple, right? Recently in our region, we did a study.
I'm sorry that I
Turn me on here.
Thank you.
Hello? Is that better? Yeah. Great. All right. I hope some of you heard what I said because it was riveting. Thank you, front row. So I was talking about, first of all, everybody taking time out of your lives to be here, and this is what community care and community support looks like. Started talking about some of the stereotypes we carry about folks that we haven't walked the same journey. And we recently in our region have done some amazing things. We did a housing study. And part of that housing study, we discovered things like that if you are working as a teacher, for example, that only 26% of rental units are affordable to you. That's 74% that are unaffordable to teachers. These are folks who have gone for a 4-year degree. They've done what people think are the right steps, and that is a result. Nurses, you would think, nurses could be able to afford everything. Right? 60% of rentals are affordable to nurses. And if you're folks that have done distribution work, it's 28%. When you look at restaurant work, 1% of rentals are affordable to you. So one economic event can change everything. And we know that folks have many reasons why their journey struggles, and they are working hard, but many people are out there trying as hard as they can. And we're one event away from being homeless. We're going to cover many things tonight, but I wanted to provide that little bit of a frame to seek to understand as we are all on this journey together. I'm going to turn it over to each one of our panelists, let them have an opportunity to introduce themselves. But again, I am Melissa Hall-Summer. I'm with Brighton Center. I started doing this work in 1989. Sometimes when I'm in a group, some people will say, I wasn't even born then. So immediately, so that's what I said, because I started when I was 15. So, but I'm going to turn it over to our group here and start with Katie. Katie, introduction.
Scared. Are you okay? Good evening. My name is Katie James. I'm the Human Services Administrator with the City of Florence.
I'm Laura Plyman. I'm the Director of Community Services and Programs for the Boone County Fiscal Court. Our role in the Community Services and Programs Department is oversight of a payroll tax that provides mental health, intellectual disability, and aging services for Boone County residents. We also work in administering our opioid settlement funds, including our police social workers that are now embedded in the Boone County Sheriff's Office, and working on issues around housing and early childhood development for the judge exec in his office.
Hi everyone, I'm Amanda Couch. I'm the CEO of Welcome House. I've been with Welcome House for a little over 11 years. I've been working with individuals and families experiencing homelessness longer than that. So at Welcome House, we provide shelter, housing, and supportive services to individuals and families experiencing homelessness.
And I've had the opportunity to work with these ladies and be in lockstep with them and many other providers. Dealing with this issue, making sure that we're progressing, and many other issues. I'm going to start with Amanda. Amanda, how does homeless show up in Boone County, and does it differ from other regions? I know you serve 8 counties here, some urban, rural, suburban. How would you describe? What's your experience?
So a couple different things. So homelessness looks, it could be people that are doubled up, so couch surfing. It could be individuals and families living in hotels. It also could be individuals or families living on the street or in a shelter. Individuals that are living in encampments out in the woods or abandoned buildings. And now we're seeing even individuals that are living in hallways. As far as the difference, I mean, we see those scenarios in all 8 counties. It may look a little different depending on the county. What I will say that's probably a challenge in Boone would be maybe the transportation piece for folks that are experiencing homelessness. So that piece may look a little different when they're trying to navigate getting from resource to resource.
Great, thank you. Katie, can you talk a little bit about the stereotypes? You know, rarely what we call stereotypes are real. Talk about the invisible families and the individuals that are experiencing homelessness.
Yeah, so I think when we think of the term homelessness, we think of an unhoused individual that we see on the street, whereas homelessness stretches much farther than that. There are individuals that are working, that are married with families, and they're homeless results of the instability for housing. They can't afford the rent. And so it's cheaper for them to pay for a hotel than it is for the rent. We have more than 400 kids just in our Boone County schools that are homeless right now. And while we don't see them on the street, those are families that are couch surfing, that are doubling up, as Amanda said, and that are in our hotels. And so while, again, we don't see them on the street, they still fall under that homelessness title.
And when we think about families, for example, I know the families that I've interfaced with, you know, they're trying very hard to keep their family together. So the very last thing they're going to be is street homeless. But a lot of our programs that are federal programs require help. You have to be street homeless. Well, families are not going to be. They're not going to let. That's the last thing that's going to happen. They're going to double up. They're going to go and stay with family. They're going to do anything they can so that their kids aren't homeless and they don't risk losing their kids to the child welfare system.
Exactly.
Laura, can you take a moment to talk about the history of the work that's been done? What's happening? What has happened? The agencies and nonprofits, faith-based, how collaboration is showing up, and a little bit of a history and like where we are now, where we've been.
Happy to. It's really exciting to share this story with you all. So in 2018, the city of Florence and our judge executive got together and said, you know, we recognize the growing issue of homelessness within Boone County. And we formed a task force at the request of then Mayor Diane Whalen and Judge Executive Gary Moore to look at what homelessness looked like in Boone County. We were also taking a look at what resources were available both within our county specifically and within the region as a whole. Once we were able to determine what that looked like, what our numbers are, who's experiencing homelessness, and what resources we had, we then set about to looking at what gaps there are and how we might fill those gaps. And I should say a very important component of that, it wasn't just Boone County Fiscal Court, Boone County government, and the city coming to the table to do it. We had our nonprofit subject matter experts here. We had Welcome House, Brighton Center, Mary Rose Mission. The library was at the table. Many other partners that I'm probably omitting at this point, and they should be recognized for the work that they've done and continue to do. Fresh Start Shower Ministries has been at the table in our work from that point on. Understanding where we are and what our need is within our community, then how can we address some of those issues. One of the low-hanging pieces of fruit that we identified was the need for emergency sheltering during winter weather events. When the winter weather is very cold, we don't have a lot of places. We do not have enough shelter beds in northern Kentucky to accommodate all of those who are experiencing unsheltered homelessness within our region. And that life safety need was something that the Boone County Fiscal Court felt was an issue that we could address. And so our internal teams, our committee, identified and designed a cold weather sheltering plan. We had everything wrapped up and ready to go at the end of 2019. We're thinking this is a great piece, and we're presenting it to the fiscal court in early 2020 as an idea of a way that we might move forward in the future to shelter individuals. And it was a great plan until COVID happened. And a lot of the plan involved our co-sheltering and congregate sheltering in community facilities, which we just couldn't do at the time, right? That wasn't a safe option. So we pivoted a little bit. We looked at some national options, and we contacted Welcome House and discussed with their team what else we might consider doing. As you also remember, during 2020, there wasn't a whole lot of traveling going on, so we had some hoteling partners that were really willing to work with us and create this sheltering program that we might be able to do. So we got an opportunity to do it during COVID. We had, if you recall, when restaurants were shut down, the library wasn't accessible, so places that people who are unsheltered might normally access to use the toilet, to wash their hands, to access food in the community. They weren't able to do that because those places were closed. And so we took a look at what we had developed with the sheltering plan. We contacted with Welcome House. We reached out to some of our faith partners. Seven Hills Church and Florence Christian Church stepped up and said, yeah, we see the need too. We want to help support this, and financially supported the project. So for a few weeks in April and May of 2020, we got to pilot a sheltering program using a hotel model with a contracted operator, Welcome House. And then that following winter, we were able to do the same thing again. We pivoted our cold weather sheltering model to using a hotel. And we are currently in operation now, 6 years of doing that same kind of a model. I'm proud to say that we are one of the only, I think, local governments in our region that are using this kind of work in northern Kentucky. We couldn't do it without our partners. We could absolutely not do it with both the hotel that is willing to take the risk of sheltering a population that they may not always be wanting to shelter. We couldn't do it without Welcome House and their team willing to step up and to, with 24 hours notice sometimes, say, yeah, we can ramp up the shelter. I will say that the way that we operate internally is that the staff internally in the county reviews the weather. We put on our meteorologist hats and we take a look at what the forecast looks like for the next week. And if certain conditions exist, we make a recommendation to the judge executive, Gary Moore, to activate the winter weather sheltering through an emergency order. As you can imagine, it's not an exact science. We're not saying below 32 degrees for 3 nights. We're taking a look at what the temperature is, what the precipitation might be, what the duration of the cold may be. So it's very inexact, but we try to be really flexible and understanding that it is really important and it's a life safety issue for individuals to have access to warmth during these cold weather emergencies. We are activated tonight. We've been activated since Saturday. And with this current forecast, I envision that we'll be activated for quite a bit longer, at least in the near term. But we've also done a lot of other work. In addition to how do we respond to that cold weather sheltering piece, we also took a look at how can we prevent some of this homelessness from happening? What resources are out there? So can we divert individuals from the shelter system by providing assistance with utility assistance or emergency rental assistance when an eviction happens? And we have invested some of our mental health tax funds to support programs like that at Brighton Center, at the Community Action Commission, as a way to prevent some of that from happening to begin with. We continue to work slowly on this issue within Boone County. It's ever present. The investment by the judge and the fiscal court in a program like this, I think, indicates how seriously they take the issue and aware that there is a need for interventions, especially when it's cold weather pieces like this.
Great, thank you, thank you. When we think about services, you talked about a lot of things going on, but there are broad-based services that are happening every day, and we think about what are we doing to keep people safe, and essentially, the cold weather sheltering is saving lives, right? It's saving lives. But when we think a little bit downstream a little bit, what are some services that are available in the region, specifically Boone County, that can get downstream a little bit and look at those folks who are navigating homelessness from a perspective of gaining housing, getting those basic needs met, et cetera. And we know that the schools have the McKinney-Vento positions, which really helps with the schools that those kids, those 400 kids homeless, navigating those resources. So can you talk a little bit about some of the services and how they're showing up, both downstream a little bit and comprehensively? Whoever would like to start?
I would think one of the ones that I am most proud of is the street outreach program that Welcome House has developed. And really, they piloted that here in Boone County several years ago. And so I would turn that over to you and share a little bit about how that works. But I think that's a fantastic resource, in addition to Mary Rose and Fresh Start Shower Ministries that are doing that initial connection in. Some of our library folks at here connecting individuals into other services. But I think the street outreach program is particularly fascinating.
Yeah, I think so. It is, and we're really proud of it, and we're trying to make changes every day to be better, to make sure that we are really meeting people where they are and meeting their needs. So when we started street outreach, gosh, years ago, we've been doing it for years, and now we do it across 40 counties in the state of Kentucky. The idea is that our street outreach service coordinators are going out into the community, and they're engaging with individuals or families that are experiencing homelessness and building rapport with them to try to understand how they can support them, what services that they can help them get connected to, because really, and emergency services. Do we need to get them off the street immediately if that's something that we can do? If it isn't, what's the next step, or what's the next option? Because sometimes shelters are full and it's not a perfect science. So so they're out in the community meeting with people, and then with our services specifically, they can even connect them to case management if that's something that they're interested in. So they'll be able to work with a case manager on whatever it is that their needs are, whatever it is that might be preventing them from getting into housing. But with the street outreach team, it really takes a lot of rapport building and trust to get people to the next step. And there's lots of services that are being provided, not just in Boone, but across all 8 counties. Rental assistance programs, street outreach, shelters. So all those services can be provided to people experiencing homelessness across all 8 counties.
I will chime in and say too, where my role is a little different than Laura and Amanda. I get to work more on the front lines with the individuals in the city of Florence. And so if one of our law enforcement officers or our fire and EMS come across someone who is unsheltered and who is outdoors, they're able to kind of call me to help navigate that process. And Welcome House is one of our main players in getting people to safety quickly, especially families with children. If families with children are sleeping in a car, that kind of takes a higher priority because you want to make sure that those kids are safe and able to kind of thrive in a safe environment, get them back into school and prevent those barriers. So Another organization too that we work with a lot is the Brighton Center, and helping families who may be sheltered but who need help with the next steps, whether that's Section 8, food stamps, and kind of just breaking down the barriers that they're facing. The Brighton Center can also help with that.
Yeah, and I think something that I just wanted to highlight too, not only working closely with Laura and her team and Katie, working with the police social workers is important too. Our street outreach always has connections with them as well, because they're engaging with individuals and trying to brainstorm, how can we help this person move forward or this family move forward.
And I think that has really been a push in our region to look at how do we get those social workers, the police social workers out there. Any police social workers here? Yeah, right there. Okay. And looking at, when it's happening, when the crisis is happening, when there's a call to law enforcement, how are we making sure we understand when it needs to be kind of traditional law enforcement, or how do we support our law enforcement individuals in that journey, and making sure that it has the right response at the right time. And, I feel like we have had such great open discussions and really great work happening around that. I also want to talk about youth for a minute, because sometimes we think about folks who are journeying and facing homelessness, and we don't think about those youth. But in our 8 counties, we have at any time between 5,000 and 6,000 opportunity youth. And opportunity youth are youth that are not engaged in school and currently not engaged in work. And so how are we engaging those folks and those youth into programs? Brighton Center runs a shelter. One of the things that I get sometimes when I'm talking to folks who don't work in social services, we're really cognizant about how we're not duplicating each other's work, right? So a lot of the sheltering that is led by Welcome House, we have run a shelter for runaway and homeless youth for over 30 years. And so we have recently gotten 2 grants that will have youth street outreach workers that will augment and support the work that's happening with Welcome House. So a lot of great things happening in that arena. So we talk about all the things, like what's happening, the great history, what we're trying to do. And still, we know it's not quite enough. We need to do more. We need to come together. We need to think strategically, because there are barriers. And when we think about barriers, I'd love to hear from the panel around what are some of those barriers preventing folks from accessing. And I know sometimes we think about that and think about the people, what the people are or aren't doing, but sometimes it's the systems and the processes that trip folks up. I know in my life, sometimes going and accessing services at my doctor, so things can trip you up as technology is coming online, depending on where you are. So what are some barriers that can trip families up as they're trying to navigate, and how do those show up?
I would say 2 pieces. First, I think that it's important to understand, and we've touched on it a little bit, but maybe haven't fully outright said it. When we talk about people who are experiencing homelessness, we often have that vision of, it's usually a middle-aged man who's on the side of the road, and he looks down on his luck, and he's holding a sign. And those are often what is termed as a chronically homeless individual most often. So those are the individuals that they may have a behavioral health, a substance use, a mental health issue that is impeding their ability to access resources and take care of themselves in a way that we would maybe expect somebody to take care of themselves. That is a very small portion of our population that are experiencing homelessness. That is not the norm. So when we look at our data from year over year with our cold weather sheltering in particular, and we see who is accessing that shelter from year over year, we have found, somewhat surprisingly, a very, very low number of individuals who are repeating accessing the shelter year over year, meaning that these individuals are having that one-time, maybe 2-time event that's happening so that they're experiencing that homelessness. So I think when you're talking about those individuals and how do they access services to remediate the issue, it's going to be different than that smaller population, though that smaller population is maybe more visible to us in what we stereotypically think of somebody who's experiencing homelessness. From my perspective, and I would certainly let Amanda, as the subject matter expert here, chime in, if we're talking about those with families, really one of our biggest issues, as we mentioned earlier, is access to housing. The issue for those who are experiencing homelessness in those instances is access to housing. We don't have enough housing to house those families. If those families are able to, if they often have incomes, they often have really abilities to take care of themselves, but they can't get into that housing. So you have an economic event, you lose a job, you have a medical bill, something happens, you're already on the line there, you lose your housing. Getting back into that housing afterward is the challenge, right? So that's why you want to prevent it. I think for our folks that are experiencing more of the chronic issues, we have a lot of other programs that really help support individuals who have behavioral health, mental health, substance use issues. The street outreach team is critical in engaging them. Programs like the shower ministry are critical in engaging those individuals and gaining trust, and hopefully when those individuals are ready, getting them into the services that they're ready for. So I would say that that was a piece of it anyway. It's that access to housing for our families. We have subsidized housing in Boone County. The Boone County Assisted Housing Department has a housing voucher program, and there are about approximately 800 vouchers that are used within our community. For many years, not just here in Boone County, but across the region, if an individual was able to access a voucher, once they received that voucher, they weren't able to find a place to use it. They weren't able to find a unit, a home that would take the voucher because we didn't have enough space for folks to go. So that is a challenge, right? And those are the folks that are receiving subsidy. There are lots and lots of folks who don't receive subsidy. Trying to find accessing to this housing is the same kind of a challenge. Yeah.
No, I mean, I think you pretty much said it. I'll throw in there transportation because I do think it's a barrier for people to get from resource to resource to be able to find that stability when they're trying to work to find stability and get into housing. One of the things I would like to highlight with the winter shelter and what Laura was talking about was we've served since November in the winter shelter, we've served 111 individuals, and 68 of them were male and 43 were female. There was a time years ago when it was more, we were serving more male than female, but now it's almost evened out. So again, when you think about homelessness, it's not just, the men that are homeless out there, chronically homeless. I will say though, out of the folks that are staying at the winter shelter, there is about 33% of them that have been homeless for 2 years or more. And so it's really trying to help identify why and why that's happening. And so that's what we try to work hard with the individual or the family to try to understand, what is preventing them from moving forward. And it could be several different things that are going on in their lives, and having the resources in the community that can help with that, whether it's substance use, mental health, maybe gaining employment. Maybe there isn't any substance use or mental health going on. It's about gaining employment to be able to afford housing, which is difficult. We already talked about that. So there's lots of challenges going on.
I would say too, I think one of the programs we don't think about, and you have some, and Brighton Center has some, permanent supportive housing programs it's a federal program that provides not only subsidized housing for individuals, but also has those wraparound services. So when you're talking about individuals who have behavioral health, mental health needs, that it may not be very likely that they'll be able to live independently and stay housed, but having a program like permanent supportive housing, having payee programs where they help manage an individual's funds so that bills are paid and stay on time, those are really important and critical pieces of this entire infrastructure that's addressing our homelessness issue within our communities.
And I think it's important to know the data, to be able to have some of these data points, for you all to have some of those data points as you're having discussions with your neighbors and your friends and your coworkers. 15% of folks that we're seeing fall in that category of what we, through the years, have visioned as what homelessness looks like. 15%. So 85% of folks don't resemble that at all. And let me add this, that 100%, whether it's the 15% or 85, 100% deserve our attention, right? And we deserve to navigate, no matter what brings you to that place. It doesn't make one population less than others, but understanding that to really try to solve the issue or mitigate the issue, we have to understand the stories and how it's showing up. You know, at Brighton Center, we work a lot with helping families and hearing families and centering their voices, and we hear a lot. And I love the phrase when folks say, "Not about us, without us." And so when you think about that, how are we centering the voices of lived experience of those folks who have journeyed this, that are journeyed this, in some of those solutions, and how are we centering some of that? What is happening in that area?
You want me to talk?
Go for it.
Participant feedback is a big one. Asking participants directly how our services are working for them. You know, when they first entered the program, maybe while they're in the program, or while they're in our program for a while, and then once they exit. So really understanding, is this working for you? Is there anything that we could be doing differently to help this process be more efficient and streamlined for them? I think that's a big, something really important that we want to make sure that we're doing. I also think looking at our data and then shaping our services around that. So I can give you data and I can look at it, but the data also helps me understand who we're serving, what barriers they're facing, not just from them telling me, but I also have it where I can pull it all together and really understand what is happening with a person or a family. So when we sit down with them and we develop a case plan with them, we can work on those steps to break down those barriers to get them into housing.
That's great. Brighton Center every 4 years does a community assessment, and we talk to about 700 or 800 of our partners, 500 at least of those that we serve. And you know, hot off the presses, right? You all are. We haven't finished it. We're still looking at the data, but I was just looking at some this morning, and 67% of folks have identified housing as the biggest barrier that keeps them from their hopes and dreams, from that self-sufficiency. And the other thing that happens is that people will say something like, "I don't know where to start." You know, walking through our doors right now with the economic situation, no matter how we view it, it's not political. It just is. With the situation folks are economically facing, we're seeing about 30% of people walking through our doors never asked for help before. They don't know where to start. Like, they've never had to walk in and ask for help before. And so, and those who sometimes have access services, it's where do you start on that journey when you're just trying to survive, working 2 and 3 jobs and still living in your car. So it's a real you know, what we hear from our families is important, and what we hear from those who have lived experience is important.
And if I may, sorry to interrupt,
Sure.
too, and thinking about when we started our work with our homelessness task force, as we're doing our data collection piece, our partners came together and helped us do a census of those who are experiencing homelessness. Something similar happens every year. It happens the last week of January. It's in Kentucky, we call it the K count, where you attempt to enumerate those who are experiencing homelessness. And this is helping to define how federal funding is determined across the country, where resources are allocated. When we were going through this initial process for our homelessness task force, our teams got together, your teams went out and met with individuals who are experiencing homelessness and asked them those same questions that you just said here. What is your barrier to accessing to being housed, and how can we help you? So that was at that point included. Their voice was very much so heard at that point.
Absolutely. Every time I ask a question that has this term in it, these days we're like, are we still talking about this? But what did we learn from navigating COVID? You know, the pandemic, you know, I know it's 6 years away, but it changed things. We learned something, especially when we're working with those who are navigating homelessness. What did we see, and what did we learn? And you hit on some of those things already, like about housing folks and the things that we learned. Was there anything that just glaringly kind of steps up that has helped us to do things better?
I think for us with the cold weather sheltering, our initial plan was to try to reach out to community partners to use shared spaces and do congregate kind of sheltering. And I think at the time we envisioned that this is something that's going to happen, maybe once or twice a winter. It's very extreme events. And because we weren't at that model and we were in a model where we were using a local hotel, we were quickly able to see that, oh, we're not going to be just doing it when it's a -15 in a polar vortex, and we need to have access to spaces more often. So realizing there that our initial thought where we could use a community space was not going to work, because community spaces are not necessarily going to be available as regularly and as often and as quickly as we want. So that was a big learning curve for us.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I'll just add is, I think one of the things we learned is, how critical housing stability is to public health. And I ran a hotel shelter during COVID with one of my direct staff, and it was an experience, but we were able to give people a safe place to stay and really help work through, some of the barriers that they were facing. So there was a piece of it that I felt was empowering for them to be able to have a safe place, know that they could come there and stay there and not have to worry about, some of the things going on out in the world, but then have the support from us to be able to work on next steps.
I also think too, Welcome House went through a major rebuild with your shelter in Covington. And I think what some of the learnings that we took from COVID and understanding that not having large congregated spaces where you can have it slightly smaller, because of a health need potentially, not just for COVID, but for other health needs that might exist in the future. But understanding too, those congregate spaces are really hard for folks to be in, right? If you're staying in a large space with a lot of people, some of whom have some mental health issues or a behavioral health issue, and you're staying in those big spaces, that can be really rough, especially depending on what your background is. So it gives you a little bit of additional cover when you're thinking, do I need to be more trauma informed in how I'm designing my space, and creating spaces for that sheltering piece. And this is what you asked, but I do want to say too, I think our philosophy has been, nobody thinks that having a shelter is the way that we don't want people to be at shelter for long term. It is a brief stop along the way. It is an emergency piece for individuals that hopefully they are rehoused and stabilized. It is not where their folks are supposed to be staying long term. We want people to be stable and in their own place to live.
And I think that one of the things that we found is that when we were doing low barrier services, that the impact that had on folks who were trying to work, that were trying to do multiple things, in the long run, we were able to really look at what does it look like to have lower barrier services. And what I mean is not having only this many hours and not this day, and you come in with these, not that we don't have parameters and we don't have, because we do, we have requirements, but how are we looking at low barrier and what does that look like to get people to the other side? Again, we don't want folks to be spinning in a system for a long time. We want those off ramps, but sometimes low barrier provides that off ramp, and it's crucial. When we think about the unique challenges that face, and we talked about youth, families, veterans, we talked about youth experiencing homelessness in Boone County, and again, we're sitting in a library system that is very responsive, right, along with other partners. But I want to recognize that. Yes. So, what are anything that you've seen around veterans, families?
So the federal government really made an interest in trying to eliminate veteran homelessness several years ago and created a separate veteran housing program, so supported housing program, a voucher type program. And Boone County Assisted Housing does have what are called VASH vouchers. And so if there is an individual, a veteran, who is experiencing homelessness, they can access those vouchers and through the VA, get supports through the VA, and then also come into Boone County Assisted Housing and get a voucher to be housed. So it's a really incredible program. I mean, there's been some data, I think nationally, that shows these VASH programs have had real impacts on veteran homelessness within our communities, and it's a fantastic resource for veterans.
Another
Go ahead.
You know, keep talking.
No, you're fine. Families want to stay together in their family unit. So there is a barrier with sheltering due to space. So I know the Welcome House can only serve X amount of families at a specific time. I'll let Amanda speak to that. But not all shelters are able to take in children due to low barrier and safety for kids. So while we have multiple shelters, not every shelter is equipped to be able to serve them. And so parents aren't necessarily willing to go into shelter because they don't want to risk being separated.
Yeah, that was an issue that we saw going on for years. So when we were at our on our Pike Street location, we served women and children only. And then when we built our new shelter on Greenup Street, we started serving 2-parent families, single fathers with children, and then we were still serving single women or single, women with children. But that definitely, I mean, we saw that so much. The family did not want to split up. And of course not. You don't want to split up from your family. So we wanted to try to accommodate that as best as we could. I think childcare too is an issue that families struggle with. And school stability. I mean, when you're either doubled up couch surfing or even maybe outside, because you haven't found a place yet, it's been difficult to get your child to school. And so that's why it's been great to work with the McKinney-Vento liaisons from the schools, because they really support the children and making sure that they can stay in their school of home, their origin, where they were, even though they became homeless. So that's been really helpful.
One of the things Laura and I were just discussing today was the impact that homelessness has on the kids that we don't necessarily see. So while Boone County Schools has a McKinney-Vento and they will help transport them from wherever they are, that takes time. So there's a process for that. It can take 24 to 48 hours to get that set up for our youth. So if a family runs out of money tonight, they pay for a stay, and tomorrow they're in their car and they're able to gather enough money to move somewhere else the next day, they just have to reset. So now we have to request new transportation. That's a new 24 to 48 hours. And then we have to hope that they're still in that location when it's time to go back to school. So it really does have an effect on the kids that are in our school system, as well as our school staff, as they're trying to navigate those challenges.
And I think that, the Seymour Foundation, which is a national foundation, Mrs. Seymour worked as a teacher for many years, and she was they wanted to invest some of their money in school performance. She was a teacher. She's like, we really need to improve performance. When they did studies, the number one thing that affected school performance was transiency. Kids who are moving from school to school to school. So they decided to invest in looking at preventing unnecessary moves or, evictions, etc. That if you could back the train up and keep kids in their home school, they had better performance, better grade attainment. So there's a program called Stable Families, which this region has, which is great. We work with Brighton Center, is one of the funded agencies, and then in Cincinnati, Santa Maria is, that works like a little upstream to say, like, how do we prevent this from happening? It's a great success, but not enough resources. So how do we make sure? I also want to mention, we have an emergency shelter that is responsive, low barrier. I would be remiss not to mention our emergency shelter here. So there are things that are in place, and I know that the work that the emergency shelter does, we all are in lockstep with that. So let's look forward a little bit. We've talked about where we've been. We talked about what we're facing. As a community, when we look forward, what policy changes, new initiatives would you all recommend to better address homelessness in Boone County?
Stronger eviction prevention, maybe?
Mm-hmm. What would that look like?
Stronger eviction prevention. So we want to prevent people from becoming homeless.
So additional funding from that happening, not laws changing, preventing the property rights pieces. Certainly, I think that's a huge piece to it. I think when homelessness does happen, we want it to be as brief as possible. So how we continue to address what housing looks like in our community and our region is really important. And I know that that's a sensitive subject for a lot of folks, but it is that is a key piece of it, is how we address that work. And we've had a coalition of community members who spent a year just looking at what policies might be good that we could consider to use to increase housing access within our community. And so I think continuing to focus on that and working right for within each of our jurisdictions and understanding what is right for us, what's right for us here in Boone County, what's right in Florence, what's right in Walton, what's right in Union, to help to offer additional spaces for folks to live, right? Absolutely. Homelessness is a housing problem.
Yeah. And I think that one of the things I had mentioned earlier, and when you said we don't want people to stay in shelter, shelter's not the end game for this. And I think all of us can be really proud that in our region I talked about the study, but there's a Home for All report, and there's a website. So I would encourage you to do a Google search of the Home for All report. It was a report that was done for our region, led by the Brighton Center was involved. Many organizations were involved, looking at everything from income aligned housing, which is housing for folks who are, looking at where their income is, right? So, because sometimes when we talk about affordable housing, people get a little bristly about that, right? But what we want is income aligned housing that are aligned. When I talked about teachers, when I talked about folks who are working in distribution, how are we having, the needs of having the day when I remember when my parents told me your housing cost should be no more than 30% of your income, ever. It's not possible. It's not possible now for many folks. I'm not saying it's not possible for anyone, but for many folks, it's not possible. We have folks that are, we have kids that are, graduated from college or in their parents' basement, not because they want to be in their parents' basement but they can't afford to leave and go out on their own. So this study looked at many dimensions of it, and there's been whole presentations on that, so I won't go down that. But we as a community are really digging into that and have good data. So looking out and seeing all of you here, knowing that we're doing the things that we're doing around the study, knowing that we have these intervention services, it is a a continuum. It's not one thing, it's many things. And I hope I can reassure you to say, like, you're living in communities that are showing up and trying to do all the things. We just need to continue pushing it and locking arms and coming together around it. We think our businesses, we talk about the workforce and how it shows up and talent. How many employers do we have in here? Any employers? Yeah. I manage an organization, so we are all somewhat employers. But when you're thinking about the health and the wellness of the talent that we have to perform the jobs is important. When you think about that, what role can the business community play in supporting the efforts to reduce the barriers around homelessness?
The first thing that pops up for me is employment, giving people an opportunity. That's the big thing for me that pops up.
I think working with the communities and understanding what the need is, and there are lots of ways that employers can show up and work within the systems and support the work that's done, and it has to be right for them. And there's examples all across the country of how that happens, and finding the way that works best for them and works best for the community, our community.
I would kind of go a different direction and volunteer and serve. There's lots of organizations that need volunteers, whether that's the Mary Rose Mission looking for a team to serve dinner, Be Concerned, Master Provisions. There's lots of nonprofits that need people to help run that organization. So if you have a staff that's looking for a volunteer day or a way to give back, I think that's another way to help support the community.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up, because we can't serve, Brighton Center, we started as a volunteer-run organization 60 years ago this year. And we started volunteer-run, right? So volunteers are the heartbeat of what we do, and I'm sure, Amanda, you would probably, we couldn't do what we do without volunteers. And whether it's volunteers at the board level, whether it's volunteers at the work level, and everywhere in between, it's important. And how you choose to engage. And by being here tonight, you are plugging in. So I appreciate each of you. Questions? Want to move on to questions? Well, you have listened to us talk, right? So I'd love to have a moment. Is there somebody going to be running with a mic? Okay, there's our mic runners. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Do we have a number? How many did we start?
We do. I mean, if you look at, again, it's an imperfect system, but the annual K count is what we base a lot of that on. The number that reflected there is relatively low. I think total last year, the entire unhoused population in Boone County was somewhere around 68, and a handful of them were veterans. So I will tell you that there are, all of the VASH vouchers have not been used. So if there is somebody that is experiencing homelessness who is a veteran, who's eligible, they're getting connected to the VA, and we're gonna try to get them housed as soon as possible.
And I do know that the veteran services that we've seen, it's knowing where to start, because a lot of, we have folks that have served this country and they're proud, right? And reaching out and asking help is not easy, and feeling like, what the things that the story that they tell themselves about that does not support the pride that they should have in serving this country. So we need to make help seeking less stigmatizing. Veterans need to know that they have served this country and there are services to them to support that. And as a whole, we need to quit stigmatizing help seeking, because all of us, whether we want to admit it or not, have needed help with something. So, other questions?
I have a couple questions. First, again, speaking about the veterans, the vouchers that they're given, are they accepted pretty well all the way around? Unlike the vouchers, for the homeless, what?
Vouchers, it's not necessarily somebody's experiencing homelessness to qualify for it. I don't know necessarily the rate specifically for the VASH vouchers versus our regular vouchers, but they are used in a similar way to our regular vouchers are. So if they have a space to go to, they can use that. If the landlord's willing to let them stay there, they can. They go through the program, they're able to do that piece of it.
I can speak a little bit on this just because we do have a shelter in Covington and we do serve we have 10 veteran beds that we serve at a time. And I don't have exact data on that, I apologize, but I will say that I feel like when our folks in that shelter do have a VASH voucher, it is accepted most of the time, especially when people learn that they are a veteran. That does make a difference.
The Cincinnati VA also has a team, a HUD-VASH team that is similar to like a street outreach at Cincinnati on Vine Street, but then they also have them in the medical doctor's offices too, locally around the community. So there is a team trying to provide support to veterans that are facing homelessness regularly.
And sometimes it's having support for those landlords, because with any kind of voucher, there usually is an inspection of, as it should be, an inspection of the properties to make sure it's in good order. And sometimes, that feels a little overwhelming to some. So how are we working with landlords to bring them along on that journey, whether it be Section 8 or VASH, et cetera?
Okay. The other question, talked about the 400 kids, in the schools. Do you work directly with the FRCs in the schools, the resource coordinators? Can they contact you, and is there a lot of coordination back and forth there?
Absolutely. Absolutely. The Friskies, the McKinney-Vento, there's staff people with McKinney-Vento in the schools. We all come together. There is also a Safety Net Alliance that has 108 partners that comes together once a month and more, that communicates about what the needs are. And we were the first Safety Net Alliance in the country to come around and say, hey, let's be smarter about this in Northern Kentucky. Let's reduce duplication. Let's increase coordination. Let's reduce waste, which in the long run puts more dollars out there to be used for those that we serve. So there's a strong communication there. So I'm glad you asked. Our runners in the back right there.
I
I'm just learning about the voucher system in Boone County, and I have a lot of questions about that. Um, One is, do we have an idea of why they're not acceptable to the people who have the vacant housing units?
So I think to be clear, it's not necessarily that, that's assuming the units are vacant. There isn't a high vacancy rate, and you might recall that there has been a large number of housing costs have increased rapidly in our communities, and the vacancy rates are very, very low. So finding a place that an individual can go to use the voucher is there. Now, there is sometimes a stigma associated with accepting somebody who has a voucher, that it's going to either that the program itself is going to be challenging, which it's really not. Our Boone County Assisted Housing Department is fantastic and really a great group to work with. But two, I mean, there come up extra steps. You have to go through an inspection once a year. You have to make sure that you're providing housing that's adequate. And if the market's really good for individuals who are either in the smaller landlord space, maybe you have one or two rental properties that you use, you probably don't want to go through that rigmarole if you don't have to, if you can rent it to somebody in the community. So that's been a challenge regionally, I think probably across the country, and it's something that we've addressed and we've been discussing as a community, is how do we engage landlords to share what the need is in our community and why you might want to do it. Honestly, if you're going to be renting to somebody of the same, that might have the same income structure as what the person who is receiving the voucher, you're going to get an organization maybe like Welcome House or Brighton Center, and they might be case managed. They might get somebody else that's in there that's working with those individuals and those families, and it's going to be an extra way of supporting those families. So it's trying to share that message, but it's a challenge.
And as you review the Home for All report, there's a lack of housing stock. You know, there's the issue of them accepting, but it's also there's a lack of housing stock, income aligned.
My understanding is that nationwide there are more vacant housing units than there are homeless. Do we have an idea in Boone County what that sort of ratio looks like?
I don't have the current vacancy rates off the top of my head, so I couldn't answer that question for you at this point, but we could look into it.
And finally, what does a voucher cost? What's the cost of a voucher?
You're getting a little bit outside my depth here because that is a whole other department. The voucher cost, it really depends on the rates for the vouchers are set and dependent upon the number of individuals in the family, and geographically where it's located at is how much a voucher could be used for, and then additionally what an income is for that family in particular. So there are a lot of factors, and maybe I missed one or two pieces.
And I don't want to oversimplify it, because if there's folks that have lots of expertise in this, but essentially the rent is the rent. So if I was the landlord, for example, and I rent for $1,000 a month, there's a formulary that if a family comes in, it's based on the number of folks in the family and their income. So their income ties into that. So usually it's somewhere around 30% of their income, and then that part is paid. The difference is paid by the voucher, but the family pays too. So it's not without family investment in that. So, and I know I oversimplify that, but I just wanted to give an example. So.
Great, thank you. Thank you for doing this. This has been really informational for me. I've learned some things about percentages and things I didn't know. My question is, how do you look at this homelessness situation and the interplay between mental health and mental health services? Because I've always thought that that was such a fundamental cause for some of these problems. Maybe I'm totally wrong. So that's my question. Is mental health a big element in what we're all talking about tonight?
I would say mental health is probably a component for all of us, all of our needs. And again, when you're looking at that smaller portion, that chronically homeless population, it probably plays a bigger role than some of the other, that 85% of the population. But certainly, I think as a community, if you talk to anybody regarding any of our issues, that the mental health in our communities right now is really suffering.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. I would say what I see a lot is people that are experiencing chronic health conditions. That's usually like the #1 factor. So chronic health is going to be something that's going to last their lifetime. Maybe they can take medication for it and manage it. But a lot of our folks, well, I even looked at the data for the winter shelter, and I apologize, I don't have the percentages, but chronic health was the #1 condition that was reported, and then mental health being next. So yes, to answer your question, mental health does play a role, but that's not the only reason that people are experiencing homelessness. But what's important for us is to understand when somebody does have, a mental illness, and they might need to. So what we do is we help connect them to the supports in the community so they can potentially get, help with that, whether that's medication or therapy or whatever that may look like for that person.
And you're not wrong. Mental health as a whole, and we've all said it, touches everything. And our ability to have an infrastructure in our communities, in our country, that responds to that and helps people live in a way that lets them feel productive and a part of our community, is the goal. And so how are we really overcoming some of those stigmas that are attached to that as people are navigating those mental health issues? And it is showing up everywhere. So
too. So we're working with people that are in crisis, and they're scared, and they're trying to figure out how to navigate, all these different things just to get stable. And so that creates some mental health. I think that would happen to probably any of us if we were in that situation. So
absolutely. There's somebody back in the green, or are we, Ron? No.
I think we're about at time. If we can't, I think the panelists can stick around for a few minutes
Sure.
to talk with you all a little bit more. But before we go, I just wanted to address very quickly, thank you. Thank you for coming here to the library tonight and engaging over this very important topic. Thank you to our panelists and our moderator for providing information that we didn't have about resources and about the reality of what we're facing. And I also want to quickly highlight, so the library, if you're not aware, the library has had a campaign that we've been going on for the last month that is Unseen Neighbors, right? A focus on homelessness in Boone County. And this event is a part of that. Also, as a part of that, we have a video series that we are releasing that was a collaboration between the library and the Shower Ministry, where we were able to create videos to give an opportunity for people experiencing homelessness in Boone County now to share their story in their own words. So there is a QR code on the screen that can take you to the video series. They're also shared on social media. If you encounter one, please take a few minutes to watch and listen to a real story. Thank you again for coming this evening. We also have, we are accepting new blankets and socks at the library at any of our locations. You're welcome to please donate. And we are gathering, I think to date we've gathered, what was it? Over 1,400 items, socks and blankets, just in the last month and a half. So but we're still going to be accepting those until the end of January, and we are going to be shuttling those to our partners that we work with, and providing them at the K count is a big piece of that. So thank you again, everyone. Large round of applause. Thank you so much.